Okay, this video is chapter 14 of how to prevent dementia. You've seen the cover of the book, Poor Man's Way to Prevent Dementia. We're going to talk about EMF, we'll talk about Wi-Fi, cell phones, and we're also going to talk about the research of Martin Pall. It's all good stuff. Okay, so I got to click on the link here. Okay, this is the picture of Martin Pall's book called Explaining Unexplained Illness. And this is his name, Martin Pall. Real smart guy. I think this guy's a genius. He's a biologist, but he's also a physicist. So he's got a unique ability to sort of see things from both perspectives. He's got a bunch of online lectures. If you want, you can catch him. Go to any of the internet video channels, and you'll see his lectures. And what's interesting is he spent a long time trying to figure out these rare, severe diseases like chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivities, fibromyalgia, and also his insight on things like PTSD and dementia. They're interesting. Okay, there's something called the nitric oxide peroxynitrite theory, and nitric oxide's NO. Peroxynitrite scientific formula is abbreviated ONOO. So this is a lot of times called the no-oh-no theory. And what's interesting about it was, how could this be? All you ever hear is Caldwell Esselstyn saying how great nitric oxide is, essential for arterial health. And now this guy Martin Pall comes along and says, nitric oxide's a terrible thing, it's causing brain damage, it's going to make everybody demented. So that sounds like totally contradictory information. So why is that? Okay, so then the first thing to be aware of is that there's different types of nitric oxide. There's nitric oxide in endothelial cells, those are the artery lining cells, and that's called eNOS, E for endothelial cell. It's also called NOS3, and the way I remember that is a capital letter E has three prongs coming out of it sideways, 1, 2, 3. So they're the same thing. NNOS is neuronal nitric oxide synthase, and I just remember that N is like one letter. Well, this is NO2. Oh, actually, I wrote that wrong. This should have been NO3, because that actually should be NO1, and this is NO2 for iNOS. Okay, this should be NOS1, nitric oxide synthide number 1, because the N is just one letter. Versus, you look at the letter I, it has two parts to it. There's the bottom stem, and then there's the little dot on top. So I remember that's NOS2. Now, who cares? Why is there all these numbers? The reason for the numbers is because these enzymes are present in other cells besides just neuronal cells for nNOS. So that way they can describe it in other locations. But for our purposes, just know there's one that happens in endothelial cells. There's one that happens in neurons, that's N. And then there's a special type associated with the immune system, especially called iNOS, inducible. And that's going to be important, the idea that it's inducible. Okay, this drawing here gives you a little sense of how it works. You start out with oxygen, nitrogen, and tetrahydrofolate, and basically you make the arginine, it's an amino acid, you make it into nitric oxide. That's what's supposed to happen. So eNOS in the endothelial cells, nNOS inside of neurons, and then iNOS when the immune system induces it to happen. Okay. There's things that can uncouple it. If it becomes uncoupled, especially let's say by a lack of folate, which comes from plants, F for folate and foliage, that's where it comes from, that can uncouple it, and the same enzyme can produce superoxide anions, which are free radicals. It's another reason why it's good to eat a plant-based diet. Okay, a little bit real quick on what is an antioxidant. This is an antioxidant, this molecule here. Usually they're relatively big molecules. Usually they'll often have multiple double bonds. This right here is an unstable free radical. It has an unpaired electron. Normally, like these blue circles, the electrons are paired. They'll have a partner, if you will, in the orbital. When you have an unpaired electron in the outer orbital, the molecule tends to be hyperreactive. It wants to grab an electron from somewhere. In general, pathogens tend to be electron stealers, trying to grab an electron from somewhere, and the pathogens steal an electron and they don't give it back. Okay, so what does an antioxidant do? An antioxidant, because it's a big molecule, it has more ability to destabilize, delocalize its charge when it gives an electron, so it doesn't become hyperreactive itself. So in this case, this antioxidant here is giving this electron to this free radical here, so it's going to then become paired with this molecule right here. So here's the drawing over here. I left a little red dot there to sort of symbolize this previously unpaired electron right there. So this has been neutralized, this free radical. It'll no longer go reacting with other things. Free radical chain reactions can be a big deal because they'll progressively destroy plasma membranes, they'll destroy DNA, they'll destroy proteins. When you hear the phrase oxidative stress, what it means is you've got more oxidants, things like these reactive oxygen species, free radicals and whatnot, than you do antioxidants to neutralize them. Okay. Normally you should have more antioxidants available, things like vitamin C in the aqueous solution, vitamin E in the membranes, etc., that will be available to quickly provide electrons to neutralize these things when they arise. Small amounts of oxidants is normal. They're always present, but when they start becoming high in amount and these become diminished in amount, then the person's at risk to get sick. You especially get antioxidants from plants. So the next question is, well, why do you get them so much from plants and not much from other sources like animal food? Because the animals already use them up. If you're out on a hot day, let's say it's 100 degrees outside, the sun is beating down upon you, the person will just say, hey, it's too hot. They'll go walk in the shade. So they can change things because they're able to walk and by their behavior. Versus the plant can't go anywhere. It has to sit in the hot sun. So the plant is able to protect itself from the overwhelming heat of the sun by its antioxidant chemicals. And when you eat the plant, you get the chemicals. Whereas if you eat an animal, they've already been largely used up. Okay, so here's where things start getting a little more complicated. The nitric oxide produced by endothelial nitric oxide synthase and neuronal nitric oxide synthase is relatively small amounts. NM is for nanomolar quantities. And this is really for very brief amounts of time, for, minutes sort of at most. Okay, whereas inducible nitric oxide means you're making a transcription change. And when this inos gets activated, inducible inos for the immune system, especially for the immune system, it'll tend to produce much higher quantities of nitric oxide in the micromolar quantities, and also like orders of magnitude more than these enzymes will make, and they'll stay elevated for hours. So this leaves more nitric oxide around. Then especially when you've got the nitric oxide synthase being uncoupled, whereby it's making more superoxide anions, or you have more superoxide anions coming off your mitochondria, that will sometimes then combine with the nitric oxide, and you'll produce these two combined together, superoxide anions with nitric oxide, to produce peroxide nitrite. And peroxide nitrite goes around the cell and does a lot of damage. Okay, there's other reasons why you could produce superoxide anions. You could also be producing them from the enzymes over here, like xanthine oxidase, for example. Now here's an example of what peroxide nitrite can do inside a cell. It can be very damaging to mitochondria. It can be very damaging to the plasma membrane calcium ATPase. Also can be very damaging to the sarcoplasm, endoplasmic reticulum, calcium ATPase. I gave much more detailed discussion of that earlier in the book. Okay, so anyways, what's the point? Well, if you can't make ATP because your mitochondria is damaged, and then also you've lost two of your calcium pumps, the plasma membrane calcium ATPase and the circa calcium pump, then you can't effectively get calcium out of the cell cytoplasm. So the cell is now much more vulnerable to excitotoxicity, meaning overstimulation, because your ability to pump it out of the cytoplasm is markedly diminished. So that will often cause the cell to die. So this is a very bad thing. Okay, and EMF is going to come into it, because EMF, I don't have it on this particular drawing, but it's going to open up voltage-gated calcium channels and allow more calcium to come into the cell. Plus an excitotoxin will be something that overactivates this NMDA receptor, and that'll allow more calcium into the cell. So excessive calcium getting into the cell cytoplasm will cause the cell to die. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about Martin Pall, and he's making some very big statements. He's saying that there's new increasing amounts of EMF that we're exposed to with 3G, 5G, etc. are unprecedented, and by extrapolating from his experience with mouse research with these things causing dementia, he thinks that mankind is headed for a massive increase in dementia. He says that typically we nowadays think of Alzheimer's having 20, 30 years of gradual progression before the person's significantly cognitively impaired. He predicts that there's going to be lots of demented 20-somethings. He feels that this generation has been exposed to a tremendous amount of EMF that's only increasing, and he thinks many of them are going to be demented in their late 20s, early 30s. So hopefully that's not true, but it's certainly a motivator to, not hold your cell phone next to your head, use a speakerphone, and to do other things to, decrease your risk of that. And you can see he's got a whole bunch of videos, and his book is real long, but it's a masterpiece, and I read a bunch of his papers too. I'm very impressed by this guy. Okay, let's see, what else is he talking about? He's talking about how people are functioning very poorly, in his opinion, from a cognitive perspective, and they got a lot of cognitive problems. He feels that the amount of insomnia, fatigue, depression, cognitive dysfunction, brain fog, anxiety, decreased memory function are, in his opinion, likely related to the increased EMF exposure. And he also thinks that this no pathway is being activated much more than in the past. And he believes, like I said, that mankind is headed for an abrupt drop in cognitive function. Here's a couple books about EMF that are both pretty good. Martin Pall's sort of more advanced. He's the most advanced guy publishing out there, and stuff that's available to people other than those doing research on it. And he's good. He is smart. Okay, here's some other guys who wrote books about this. This is, Mercola's book. And Mercola a lot of times can be a little bit of a BS artist. He's a little bit of a salesman. But let me tell you something. That guy's smart. He didn't get to be a millionaire by being stupid. And this book is a good book. I was kind of surprised how good it was. It's carefully referenced. Goes into a lot of detail. And, of course, he sells something to shield from EMF. But I can tell you, it's a good book. I was surprised at how good of a book it was. All right, so anyways, he goes through all the different ways. And the big thing to know about EMF is just that it opens up voltage-gated calcium channels on your nerve. So what that means is it's going to increase cytoplasmic calcium. And that's why you want to avoid it. That's why you don't want to be holding a cell phone up to your head unless it's an emergency. Use your speakerphone whenever you can, and don't be carrying the thing right next to you. Don't carry it next to your Johnson. Don't carry it, and that's your front pocket. Don't carry it, wouldn't carry it in your backpack either next to your rectum. There's increasing rectal cancer. I wouldn't carry it in the front pocket. Increased risk of breast cancer. This book, Overpowered here by Martin Blank, talks about more problems related to cell phones and how they can cause DNA damage, and he did a lot of research himself on that subject. And conceptually, I think this is a good way to view health. Basically, like a video game, you travel through the video game as a character, and you do certain things, you get good points. And you do certain other things, you make a mistake, you fall into a trap, and you lose health points, energy points. And that's basically how it plays out. Like, people want to take one pill or one supplement, but that doesn't work. Get your healthy diet, because if you're eating a lousy diet, you're going to be, what most Americans are, is low in fiber, low in antioxidants, low in vasodilators like potassium and magnesium, and nitrates, which are the precursors of nitric oxide, low in antioxidants, just because that all comes from plant foods. And then having their act together from a social point of view, maintaining some friendships, getting along with their family, if possible, living in a nice community, getting their sunshine, exercise, maintaining their brain with reading, developing cognitive reserve. Religion makes people a lot healthier. They're way healthier, people in religion. Our popular society has made it fashionable to mock religion, but that's why we're headed downhill. All sort of successful communities have had some type of religious system that sort of keeps them close and linked together. A lot of these toxic chemicals people are exposed to, trichloroethylene, you go to the dry cleaner, if you use liquid paper, advanced glycation end products from eating high-fat diets, high-protein diets, roasted nuts and things like that also have a lot of them. You could take a food that's healthy, like a boiled potato, but you fry it, and all of a sudden it's not healthy. It'll have real high AGEs, advanced glycation end products. Okay, the cooking oils, omega-6 oils, becoming iron overloaded, excessive amounts of iron predispose you to oxidative stress. And so I just showed, it goes on and on. There's a whole bunch of things. So the frustrating thing about this is there's a lot of things you need to do to optimize your health. But the good thing about it is these are all doable. You don't have to be a genius. It doesn't take a lot of time. Just avoid atrazine. Real simple. Don't eat, non-organic corn. avoid these estrogenic chemicals. I've given a bunch of previous lectures on how to do that. Avoid caffeine. Caffeine is not good for you. Just because there's a lot of people trying to trick you into, buying the commercial coffee and stuff and tea, it's not good for you. And you can figure that out for yourself. It mimics acute stress. Nobody wants more stress, then why drink caffeine? Okay, GP and, on the non-organic soy that's sprayed all the time, you want to avoid that. We talked about EMF issues. We talked about these types of trails, in the sky. And there's other things that are stressing people out. And also, MJ is for idiots. Don't let anybody tell you that MJ is good for you. It's toxic. It causes brain damage. It causes schizophrenic breakdowns. It's often sprayed with toxic chemicals, including, para and then QUAT, etc. Alcohol is bad for you. So there's nothing good about alcohol. Whatever you heard to the contrary is not true. That's been shown. Okay. So all those things are things that make people healthy. So anyways, that was really the point of the chapter. And I think the most extraordinary thing about that chapter was the claims of Martin Pall. And he's the guy who would know better than anyone else. I mean, he's a physicist. He's been studying this a long time. He's been writing lots of papers on the subject for many years. So do what you can to minimize your exposure. You can't completely minimize it, but do what you can. So anyways, hope that was helpful.